Being a marketer's no sweat. You just have to manage dozens of channels, launch hundreds of campaigns, score thousands of leads, and okay, fine, it's a lot of sweat. Unless you have HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools to help you do all that and more. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
Welcome to the Two-Footed Podcast, your daily dive into the biggest stories and talking points from the world of football, with a particular focus on the Premier League. Before we get started, a quick shout out to our presenting sponsor, Liberty Shield. Liberty Shield is a VPN provider, and one of the many benefits of their service is that you can change your IP address to unlock geo-restricted content. And for Premier League fans like us, that means you can catch all the action no matter where you are. So if you use their UK VPN, that means you get all live matches on Sky Sports, TNT Sport, Amazon Prime, and the highlights with Match of the Day on BBC iPlayer. Furthermore, you can switch your location to the USA to access all those matches you may otherwise miss using American streaming services like Peacock and USA Network. If you sign up now, you can get 25% off by using the code EPL25OFF. That's EPL25 off at checkout for 25% off. That's whether you choose their VPN router or the software app for your favorite devices. Liberty Shield have got you covered. Oh, and don't forget, after today's episode, be sure to check out our shorter bite-sized pod, the Two-Footed Extra. That will keep you up to speed with all the latest news and gossip. And be sure to check out the other shows that EPL Index offers. Today was hugely enjoyable, a tad predictable, previewing every Premier League round with a different guest each week, where he really does put them through the ringer. You come off that show, I've guested on that show, you come off it, and you feel like you've been interrogated. It's a really good listen, though. There's also our new show, our roundup show. It's called The Final Whistle. It's hosted by Nina Kauser and Ben Poscod, and they summarise all the matches and the big talking points. It comes out every Sunday evening, so make sure you're listening. Now, let's dive in to today's biggest stories. What's good, boys and girls? Two-Footed Podcast. Today is Thursday. It is the 24th of October, and we are still reeling from the news that Big Dunc is out at Inverness Caledonian Thistle. Now, we must first begin. I may have been a little bit harsh on him yesterday to suggest that he walked away in their hour of need. But as you can, I'm sure, understand, this was huge news. This was devastating news. Losing content if Big Dunc is not ruining a football team somewhere. But the more stories that come out, the more it appears very clear that Inverness, because they're having to cut costs, it's not just him. There's a couple of players that have been released from their contracts as well. It appears like he had gone without being paid for the last month or so. There are stories that he was actually subbing some of the players who weren't getting their wages, paying their petrol money out of things of that nature. So it does appear like Big Dunc was trying to do what's best. So for today's podcast, obviously today is Thursday, so there are some listeners' questions, and we'll get to them a little bit later, but we're going to dedicate some time to Big Dunc, and we're going to do a bit of a retrospective on the career of Big Dunc. So he was born in Stirling, Scotland, December 27th, 1971. He joins Carst Thistle, which is a youth club, and from there he makes his way to Dundee United. At Dundee United, he would break into the first team, making his debut in November of 1990 away to Rangers. He scored his first goal against East Fife in the Scottish Cup in January of 1991. Now, in what would be his first full season, he played 14 games in that season where he breaks in, scores 4 goals. The next year is his first full season. He scores 17 goals in 41 games in all competitions, 15 in 38 in the Scottish Premier Division, as it was known then, follows that up the next year with 15 goals in 33 games, 12 in 30 in the league. Now, then things start to get interesting with Big Dunc. So he moves to Rangers for £4 million. At the time, that's the British record. If you wonder why Rangers would eventually go out of business, it's because of moves like this. So in April of 1994, less than a year after he's made the move, Rangers are playing Wraith Rovers, and Big Dunc decides to headbutt John McStay. John McStay was a long-time Wraith Rovers player, cousin, I think, of Paul McStay, the Celtic legend. There's an argument between them on the pitch, and Big Dunc headbutts him. The referee doesn't see it, but the linesman sees it, it gets reported, and he's eventually reported. Now, the police decide to involve themselves in the situation as well. And unfortunately for Big Dunc, he had 2 previous charges of assault against him away from football. So this is his 3rd offence. And as a result of that, he was given a 3-month prison sentence, and the Scottish Football Association also banned him for 12 matches. So remember, British record signing, and in his first season, this is what takes place. Now, it should be pointed out that he had missed a chunk of that season through a couple of different injuries. Ultimately, that year, he plays 15 games and scores 1 goal. Not exactly the return that Rangers were looking for. The next season, he starts off with Rangers, and he starts off well. He scores 4 goals in his first 6 games. And then Everton decide that they're not just going to roll the dice, they're going to go big on Big Dunc. And they bring him in for loan with an agreement in place that they would buy him as long as he stayed fit and stayed out of trouble, basically. A gentleman's agreement. Before we had the official loan with an option to buy, this was kind of a try before you buy situation. Everton took him with the agreement of, we'll keep him till Christmas, and then we'll decide whether he's our Christmas present or we send him back to you as your Christmas present. And to his credit, Big Dunc came south and performed pretty well. Now, there's no way of wrapping up his Rangers career as anything other than disaster. But he joins Everton. In his first season, he scores 8 goals in 28 games. The deal gets made permanent. Significant outlay for the Ev. The next year, 7 goals in 20 games. Number of injuries. Couple of off-field issues. Then he's 11 in 36, 11 in 32. And then in 98-99, he goes to Newcastle. He starts the season with Everton, plays 17 games, 13 in the league, goes to Newcastle for big money. Like, Newcastle have decided that they're all in on Big Dunc, and they throw $8 million at it. Now, Big Dunc doesn't really want to leave, but Everton are going in the wrong direction, and Everton need the money. And Everton have sold him without telling the manager, who, by the way, is Walter Smith, who's also the manager that had bought him for Rangers back in the day. So he goes to Newcastle. So in his first spell with Everton, he plays 133 games and scores 42 goals, which is not a great return, but there was something about him, like there was a presence about him. He was great in the air. He was really good with hold-up play, could bring others into the game. He offered a lot, but he didn't score the goals that Everton were looking for. And why Newcastle thought he was going to do it there, I don't really know. But he goes to Newcastle, finishes out that season playing 9 games, scoring 2 goals. The next season, 99-2000, he plays 32 games. These are all competition numbers, by the way. 32 games and scores 10 goals. Number of injuries again. The partnership with him and Shearer is awkward. It doesn't really work. I think Newcastle had been trying to recreate the Shearer and Sutton pairing, but Shearer was a good bit older at this point, about 5 years older, had a couple more injuries. And while Big Dunc was better in the air than Chris Sutton, he wasn't as good on the ground as Chris Sutton. And what's often overlooked is that the partnership with Sutton and Shearer largely worked because they were both good on the floor, not because of Sutton's ability to win flick-ons. That was a part of it, but not as big a part of it as their link-up play. And also, the flick-ons weren't as successful anymore because Shearer didn't have the pace to run away from defenders anymore. So Newcastle decide they're going to sell him back to Everton for $3.75 million. So this is a year and 8 months, I think, he spent at Newcastle. Missed most of the 8 months through injuries, and then in that second season, he performed okay, but not great. So he goes back to Everton for $3.75 million. Now, at this point, this is August 2000. Duncan Ferguson is 29 years of age. Should be banging his peak. But from here on, he is hammered by injuries. But he finds a bit more of a goal-scoring touch. So in that first season, he scores 6 goals in 13 games. So he's almost 1 in 2. He just can't get on the field. The next season, he's 8 in 25. That's 1 in 3. That's about average for what Big Dunc had been the first time at Everton. The next season, he plays 8 games, doesn't score a goal. He's just ruined by injuries. And people write him off at that point. He's now 32. People think he's finished. But he has 2 bounce-back seasons, scoring 9 in 24 and then 6 in 37. Now, the goal numbers aren't great, but at least he's back playing regularly. And in this final season, he scores 1 goal in 33 games. Again, at least he's playing. He's available, he's fit, he's healthy. He decides to retire at the end of that season. So he spent basically 10.5 seasons with Everton. He played 273 games and scored 72 goals. Ultimately, he didn't deliver on what they outlaid for him, but because they got so much money from Newcastle for him, it's about even. But Everton fans adore him because of how committed he was, because he stood up for himself and for his teammates. Everton fans really took him in as one of their own and loved him. Like, genuinely, they call him a legend. A striker that played for my club for 273 games and he scored 72 goals. Well, they wouldn't last long enough to have played that number of games. In his career, he plays 423 games. Injuries, obviously, a huge factor. Scores 126 goals. So he's about, 3.5, a goal every 3.5 games for his career, which is a disappointing return, given what a unique skill set he had at the time. Like, Big Dunc is 6'4", 6'5", had great spring, had a great left foot, like a genuinely great left foot. Andy Carroll, when he came along, was basically a Big Dunc regen and had many of the same issues as Big Dunc in terms of injuries, in terms of certain off-field issues, certain, let's say, personality quirks, temper issues. But Big Dunc was a better player than Andy Carroll. And ultimately, I would look at his career as a disappointment. 7 caps for Scotland, that should have been 70. With the talent he had, that should have been 17. He was never capped after 1997. He won the Scottish Premier Division rather, with Rangers in 93-94. That's the season where he headbutts the fella, plays 15 games, 10 in the league. He played little to no part, contributed little to nothing to winning that. He did win the FA Cup with Everton in 94-95, the last time, of course, that Everton actually won anything. He came off the bench in the 51st minute, replaced Paul Rideout, who'd scored Everton's goal, and he played the last 39 minutes plus stoppage time. So let's just say he played 45 minutes in the game. That's kind of the highlight of his career. He was an FA Cup runner-up with the Toon. He was a Scottish Cup runner-up with both Dundee United and Rangers. He was a one-time Premier League Player of the Month, February of 1995. Again, that is his first season in the league. He promised so much as a young player and ultimately just didn't deliver. But Everton fans will always admire him and always fight his corner. And part of that is that after he retired, he got involved. Like, there was talk that Everton, in their long pursuit to build a new stadium, were going to move out of the city of Liverpool and kind of almost give the city itself to Liverpool FC, and Everton would play, further out, more in the suburbs. And Big Dunc was a big voice and a big part of the campaign that ultimately kept them in the city, and a long time later led to the new stadium they have. When I come back, we're going to talk about the managerial career of one Big Dunc. We'll see you in a sec. Right, welcome back. So, another one of the reasons that Everton fans are, enamoured with Duncan Ferguson is that when he retired, he moved to Spain. He went and he lived in Mallorca and just stayed out of the spotlight. Nobody heard from him for years. And then he called David Moyes and he asked if he could come back and work at the academy, with young players, a development role. And he did it for free. Didn't want any money to do it. Wanted to do it for love of the game and love of the club. And that's really admirable, to his credit. That is admirable. So he came back and he worked hard. He got his UEFA B licence. He got his FA licence for the Scottish FA. Then he got his UEFA B. He got his UEFA A. And he went on and he did his pro licence. And eventually he worked his way up to being on the first team coaching staff at Everton. And he would remain on that staff through multiple managers. Martinez, Koeman, and then Marco Silva. Marco Silva gets sacked on the 4th of December, 2019, and Big Dunc takes over. And Big Dunc manages 4 games between the 5th of December and the 21st of December. In the league, he oversees a 3-1 win over Chelsea, a 1-1 draw with Manchester United at Old Trafford, and a 0-0 draw with Arsenal. That's a really good run. No matter who you are, that's a really good run. He also oversaw a draw in the League Cup quarter-final with Leicester City, 2-2 draw, and they lost 4-2 on penalties. Officially, that goes down as a draw for Big Dunc. So 4 games, 1 win, 3 draws. He's done his part. He's done his role. And Everton would, of course, move on and decide to appoint Carlo Ancelotti, and Dunc would revert to being an assistant on the staff, and he would work there as time went past, through the Carlo era, into the Rafa Benitez era, And then Rafa was sacked on the 16th of January, 2022, in the 21-22 season. And Big Dunc would take over again as caretaker manager from the 18th of January to the 31st of January. Now, in this spell, there was only one game. Everton were home to Aston Villa. This is Aston Villa before they got good. And Everton would lose. They would lose by 1-0. So that spell ends with one game, one defeat. Frank Lampard came in. Dunk reverted back, I think, to being on the staff. But that summer, he parted ways with Everton. He decided he was going to strike out on his own. And he was waiting for the right opportunity. So we're in the 2022-23 season. And on the 25th of January, Forest Green Rovers decide Ian Birchnell's not getting the job done. There's only one man for this task. And it is the one and the only Big Dunc. And what follows is arguably the worst managerial job ever done in the history of football. 18 games, 1 win, 3 draws, and 14 defeats. That is a staggering level of incompetence. Now, to be fair to him, they were staggeringly bad before he got there. He walked in on the 26th of January. 28 league games had been played. They were bottom of the league. Now, there was still the possibility of staying up, but it was not a strong possibility. They had won 6 games with 5 draws. Enter Big Dunc. Sorry, with 6 draws. 6 wins, 6 draws. Enter Big Dunc. Loses to Shrewsbury. Loses to Peterborough. A draw with Morecambe. Loses to Charlton. Loses hammered away at Ipswich. Loses to Lincoln. Loses to Accrington Stanley. Loses to Bristol Rovers. Loses to Plymouth. Beats Sheffield Wednesday by 1-0. This is a huge upset because Sheffield Wednesday would get promoted at the end of the season. Loses to Portsmouth, loses to Derby, loses to Wickham, gets hammered at home by Barnsley. At this point, they've given up. They get a draw with Fleetwood Town. They lose to Cheltenham, they lose to Oxford, and they lose to Cambridge. And thus ends the Big Dunc era, because after that horror show, he is dismissed without much consideration. Now, they did pretend like they were going to keep him for a couple of weeks, but ultimately, it was just completely unacceptable, and they had to move on from him. They just had to move on from him. 1 win in 18 games. 14 defeats in 18 games. 5.56% win rate. Atrocious. So Big Dunc leaves. And I think, foolishly, he'll hardly get another job. But we're into the 23-24 season. And on the 17th of September, Inverness Caledonian Thistle decide to sack Billy Dodds. And after 9 days of, I assume, prayer to whatever God they believe in, the message comes down, there's only one man, get Big Dunc in. So in comes Big Dunc. Now, 26th of September. They've played 6 games in the league. They've lost 5 of them with 1 draw. And Big Dunc immediately turns things around. They beat Arbroath. They draw with Partick Thistle. They beat Airdrieonians. They draw away to Dundee United. They beat Ayr United. They draw away to Dunfermline. And you're thinking, Big Dunc is going to keep them up here. But it wasn't to be. It just wasn't to be. A loss at home to Wraith Rovers was followed by a win away to Queen's Park, but then back-to-back defeats Greenock Morton and Arbroath. A draw with Partick Thistle, a draw with Greenock, a loss away to Airdrieonians, a win away to Ayr United, but then a loss at home to Dundee United, a win away to Wraith Rovers, but then a loss at home to Queen's Park, draws with Partick Thistle, Arbroath, and Dunfermline, a win away to Greenock, but then a draw with Airdrieonians, a defeat at home to Ayr United, a draw away to Dundee United, but then a defeat away to Partick Thistle. Then it was 2 wins, Arbroath and Queen's Park. Then they lost at home to Wraith Rovers. They drew away to Dunfermline, and then they beat Greenock Morton on the final day, but they still ended up in the relegation playoff. Now, they almost stayed up because they knocked out Montrose in the first round, 1-0 on aggregate over 2 legs. And then they played Hamilton Academical, who were the team, I think, looking to come up from League One. They lost the first leg 2-1, but that was away. They still had the chance at home to stay up. They went 2-0 down and it was game over. They end up losing 3-2. They showed some fight, but ultimately they lost 5-3, on aggregate and were relegated. Now, he also oversaw their Scottish Cup run. They beat Cowdenbeath and then Bromhill before losing to Hibernian. They had been eliminated from the League Cup before he got there. They'd also gone out of the Challenge Cup before he got there. They did win the Inverness Cup, but that was also before he got there. In the North of Scotland Cup, he oversaw a 1-0 win over Rots, but then they lost to Nairn County on penalties in the final. They were 1 point shy of staying up, and to his credit, he inherited a team that were in horrendous form. And if he'd gotten those 6 games at the start of the season, given how the results went through the year, he probably would have kept them up. But that's not good for my agenda. So I just look at it like he took them down. That's back-to-back relegations for Big Dunc. And again, likewise with the season at Forest Green, they were going down. He just happened to be the guy that took them down. This season, with Inverness, in the league, a draw with Dumbarton, a loss away to Annan Athletic, a draw with Montrose, a draw with Kelty Hearts, a win over Queen of the South, a draw with Alloa Athletic, a draw with Cove Rangers, a draw with Stenhousemuir, a defeat away to Arbroath, but a win at the weekend over Annan Athletic, and that is their league games up to now. In the Scottish League Cup, they lost to Annan Athletic. They beat Bonnyrigg Rose, mighty Bonnyrigg Rose. They lost to Arbroath on penalties, a 0-0 draw. But these games have to be decided one way or another in the group stage. They lost 5-3 on penalties. And then Dundee hammered them 6-0. In the Challenge Cup, they beat Stirling Albion, but then lost to Livingston on penalties after a 2-2 draw. And in the North of Scotland Cup, Nairn County beat them 4-1, which isn't great. But now I assume that's a weaker team. I don't think that's a full-strength team he'd have played in that one, but nonetheless, it counts. And that's it. That is the legacy of Big Dunc as a manager. 75 games, 19 wins, 25 draws, and 31 defeats. Now, those defeats don't include the games they lost on penalties. So I think I went over 4 that were lost on penalties. So 4 of his draws were maybe penalties. 4 of his draws were maybe penalties. Right. I'm going to leave it there and stop bullying Big Dunc. I'll be back after the break with listeners' questions. But just know that while Big Dunc may no longer have a job as a football manager, he'll always have a place in our hearts. Right, welcome back. So it is Thursday, so it is listeners' questions day, and we're going to jump straight in. This one is from Mikhail Campbell. Could you speak about your opinion on the most interesting player-manager close relationships? For example, Harry Redknapp, Nico Kranjčar, Jose Mourinho, Michael Essien, Antonio Conte, Romelu Lukaku, Jurgen Klopp, Bobby Firmino. Yeah, I mean, I do think much of this is lost in the modern game because players tend to spend less years of their career at clubs. Managers no longer spend as long at clubs. But Nico Kranjčar and Peter Crouch with Harry Redknapp are 2 that I've always found really interesting. And I think part of it from the manager's side is that they're quite unique talents. Nico Kranjčar, for a very talented playmaker, is also a big guy and a hard worker. And I do think that's a factor. I think Redknapp likes that unique type of player. We also saw him do crazy things with Adel Taarabt, big, powerful playmaker. Then you've got Crouch, who's just such a unique profile, like 6'7". That's rare in football to begin with. But then far more skilled on the floor than he is in the air. Just a very unique player. And I think when you look at Crouch's international career, it shows just how difficult teams found it to deal with him when they didn't see him on a regular basis, when they weren't as familiar with his games and the flaws in his games, because obviously there were flaws in his games. And I think that's what a lot of this comes down to, is managers find comfort in players that can adapt to how they want to play, that can quickly take on information and don't need a huge amount of guidance to do their job. Harry Redknapp knew Peter Crouch was going to give him a certain performance every week. He knew that Jermaine Defoe would give him a certain performance every week. Same with Bobby Firmino. Jurgen Klopp knew. Jurgen Klopp apparently, now I can't verify this, and nobody will ever really verify it, but Liverpool were going to sack Brendan Rodgers in the summer of 2015 after a disastrous 14-15 season. The manager they wanted was Jurgen Klopp, who they had tried to hire when they first bought the club. He was early in his Dortmund tenure, but he was the one that was identified for them. Then they tried to hire him again a couple of years later when they were getting rid of Kenny Dalglish. So they tried to hire him before Kenny and after Kenny. And they end up with Rodgers because that's just who they got stuck with, because all the managers they wanted turned them down because they were just in the middle of whatever it was they were working on at the time. With Pep, it was that incredible Barcelona team, and he wasn't ready to leave it at that point in time. With Klopp, he wasn't ready to leave Dortmund. So when he does leave Dortmund, Liverpool go straight to him and say, look, we want you, this is the job, yada, yada, yada. And Jurgen says, I need a break. Now, when he had announced he was leaving Dortmund, which was, I think, a month or two before the end of the season, could have been a little bit more even, he had said he was going to take a year off. Instead, he took 4 months. And there's always been a rumour that Liverpool basically spoke to him that summer, got his assurance that they would be his next club, and decided to just stick with Rodgers until such time as Jurgen called them and said, look, I'm good to go. And that part of that was that Jurgen told them, buy this guy, Firmino. It's very clear Rodgers never wanted him, tried to block it multiple times, insisted on Christian Benteke. But there's always been a rumor, a rumbling that basically Jurgen wanted Bobby Firmino. He was a player he'd identified for his Dortmund team to basically be his next Kagawa, to play that number 10 position. And Jurgen, with the contacts he had in the Bundesliga, had spoken to managers who'd worked against Firmino, had spoken to coaches that had worked with him, had spoken to his Hoffenheim coach, and basically gotten the word that this guy is super intelligent, incredibly coachable, and doesn't need a lot of babysitting. And that's what Klopp wanted for that team. And when the Liverpool opportunity appeared, he knew that was a player that could be a staple, a building block for him to start working with. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it turned out to work really, really well. Another one you mentioned there, Conte and Lukaku is just always an interesting one, isn't it? Because when you think Conte, you think graft, immense amounts of graft, great movement. Lukaku's movement's decent, but Lukaku's more about short distance movement in the box, not necessarily constant runs in behind, but it just works every time. It just works. And when Conte went to Chelsea, he insisted on Lukaku. That was the striker he wanted. He insisted on Lukaku. And instead they gave him Alvaro Morata. And Lukaku went to United. And I remain convinced to this day that if they had gone the other way around, because Morata was initially linked to United, I think Morata would have worked well at United under Jose. And I think Conte would have gotten the right tune out of Lukaku. Now, obviously, Chelsea would end up buying Lukaku after he worked with Conte at Inter, but he had wanted them to buy him before he himself would go to Inter. And I think, again, it's just, with someone like Lukaku, he's the type of player that only certain managers will connect with. And I think he connects well with Conte. So I think Conte is able to get the best out of him, whereas I don't think Jose did. And certainly at Chelsea, when he went back there, it didn't work with different managers. So I think it's a two-way street. Some players just need a certain type of manager, and some managers want players that they can trust, that they believe they can trust. Moving on. Isaac Gilding. After his string of impressive performances this year, where does Ibu Konate sit in the all-time list of PL centre-backs? Where could he get to if things go well for him? The ceiling for him is probably fifth. Probably fifth. Van Dijk, McGrath, Campbell, Adams. Yeah. I think he could get to fifth. I currently have Jaap Stam in that fifth spot. I think Ibu's the closest thing we've seen to Stam. I think he's slightly better on the ball. Doesn't use his power as well as Stam did, but has the same type of power. So I think the ceiling for him is fifth. Right now, he's top 20. He's somewhere between 15 and 20. But I'd really need to sit down and chart it out. But I would say he's somewhere between 15 and 20 right now. The biggest marker on him is going to be his health. Can he stay on the pitch? If he does, he's going to be golden. AMK 2889, looking for 211s. The first players who played a decent part of their career out of position, but were still very good to great in that position. The other 11 of players who also played consistently out of position, and it showed, and yet there was fan media aura around them. Okay, so we'll start with that one. So let's begin. So the goalkeepers, I'm just going to pick two random people that I can think of that played as an outfielder that ended up in goal. I remember watching Lucas Radaby playing goal for Leeds at Old Trafford after, I think, Nigel Martin was sent off. It could have been, I think it was Nigel Martin that got sent off. I'm going to go with Nigel Martin, but it could have been John Lukic either. It doesn't really matter. Either way, Lucas Radaby went in goal and was great. For the one that it did not go so great for, I'm just going to say Jose Enrique. He went in goal up at Newcastle one time after Pepe Reina was sent off. And just because I don't really like Jose Enrique, either player or the terrible set of lads he's become, we're going to name him. But for the players that played at a position and it didn't work, we're going to have Jordan Henderson at right back at home to Leicester City in the Premier League, a disastrous performance that would contribute to Liverpool not winning the league that year. We're going to have Jordan Henderson at centre-back, making his second appearance in this team, the most catastrophically embarrassing centre-back I've ever seen. The other centre-back then, I did once watch Roberto. I'm just going to do this based on memory rather than players that played bunches of careers, because this is fun here. I did once watch Roberto Carlos play centre-back for Real Madrid in-game and just get absolutely shellacked with high balls, but I'm not going to go with him. See, a lot of the guys that played centre-back could play otherwhere, they kind of grew up playing up through the spine, like Paul Warhurst would be an example. Dion Dublin would be an example. Let's say Dion Dublin centre-back. We'll go with him. Left-back, James Milner. Just couldn't defend to save his life, but he got a bunch of assists in the Champions League one year and people think he was good. In midfield, Jordan Henderson at defensive midfield, without question. Who else will we put in? We'll go with a two-man midfield. And we'll James Milner in a double pivot. So the Milderson double pivot in midfield. In attack, I think Theo Walcott played most of his career out of position as a winger. I just don't think he was a winger. I think because he was quick, people played him as a winger. But I think he was actually a striker. So I'm going to go with Theo Walcott because I think if he plays his entire career as a striker, I think he has a better career. On the other wing, that's tough. I'll go Danny Welbeck, who played far too much of his career out wide and it wasn't good. And as a 9, not great, but he's all right. So Danny Welbeck on the wing. Two strikers then that should have played elsewhere. I'll go Andy Carroll should have been a centre-back. And Big Dunc should have been a centre-back as well. We put the two boys up front together. The team then that actually did well out of position. Right. I'm going to put Paolo Maldini in because he wasn't a left-back. He just ended up there by accident. And he was unbelievably good. So we'll go with him. But I've got to get Dennis Irwin in this team as well because he also spent his career playing left back despite being a right back. So just to have him in the team, I'm just going to stick him back where he belongs, right back. Although, no, that's not really right. Do you know what I'll do? I'll put Irwin at left back and I'll put Maldini at centre back, which he wasn't a centre back either. Maldini was a right-sided midfielder, for those that are unaware. And he got put playing left back because of an injury crisis and did so well that, in his own words, they just sort of forgot that it wasn't my position. And he went on to become the greatest player to ever play that position, the greatest defender of all time. So we'll go Maldini at centre-back, Irwin at left-back. At right-back, I'm going to go Branislav Ivanovic. Played much of his career as a right-back, was actually a centre-back, was tremendously good at right-back. And next to him as the other centre-back, I'm going to go with Emmanuel Petit. Played a bunch of games at centre-back and was brilliant there. So I'm going to go with him. Though I am tempted to go with Desai, who I always preferred as a defensive midfielder. No, we'll go with Desai. We'll go with Desai. Should have been defensive midfielder his whole career. We'll go with Desai at centre-back. So, Ivanovic, Desai, Maldini and Irwin, that would be an unbelievably good defence. Even with Lucas Radebe behind them. Midfield. Defensive midfield, Lothar Matthäus. Lothar Matthäus was a central midfielder or attacking midfielder who got moved to defensive midfield for reasons. Managers trying to be too clever. Was tasked with trying to man-mark players like Michel Platini and Diego Maradona and turned out to be absolutely incredible. Wasn't a defensive midfielder, but played there a lot and was genuinely brilliant at it. So he's in. Central midfield. I'm going to say actually, yeah. No. Oh, I don't know now. I'm confused between three. I'm confused between a couple of players. Do you know what? I'll say John Barnes. I'll just go with John Barnes, who was obviously a winger, but played in the latter part of his career, played centrally and was really, really good. So I'll go with him. For our wingers, I'm going to go with Rivaldo. Played a chunk of his career on the left wing, despite being kind of a striker. Early part of his career, prior to kind of Barcelona and the ascent to everybody knowing him, he played left wing and he was unbelievable. I think even the first couple of years at Barca, he played left wing. Certainly remember him roasting United from left wing in the Champions League in 1999. So I'll go Rivaldo, one wing. I will go with I'll come back to it. Up front, I'm just going to stick David James in just because it's funny. David James coming on as a striker remains one of the funniest things I've ever seen. To me, that just went well, so I'm putting him in. And I'm going to put... I'm going to put Dalian Atkinson on the right wing. I mentioned him yesterday. He was a striker, played a lot of his early football as a right winger, was really good. So we're going to go with him there. Our other striker, do you know what? I'm going to go with Bobby Firmino, who played his Liverpool career as a 9, despite being a 10. Do you know what? Do you know who I'm going to go with? I'm going to go with Bobby Firmino and Lionel Messi. Lionel Messi's not a striker, but he played so much of his career as a striker, either as a false 9 or, in a front, whatever. Lionel Messi was a 10 that never really got to play as a 10. Plays in the front 2 for Argentina. I'm just going to go with Lionel Messi. Lionel Messi and Bobby Firmino. That's my strikers. Right, that is me for today. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll be back later today with 2-footed extra, but I'll be back tomorrow with the main pod. See you then. Bye-bye.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.